In April of '92, I started breaking out in sores, but the sores wouldn't go away, regardless what was put on them.
They said that the Gulf War was this perfectly clean medical miracle, that no one got hurt, and we're living proof that people did get hurt.
All the chemical and biological weapons that we learn about have immediate effects. No one ever discusses something that makes you sick 6 months later.
This is horrible. This is America. I personally feel that my own country killed my child.
The Gulf War was hailed as the ultimate clean war, the coalition victory attained with miraculously low Allied casualties. But 3 years later, thousands of Gulf War soldiers are sick and asking, was I poisoned by my own country? As the sickness spirals, governments are being forced to reveal the myriad of hazards the troops faced. Evidence now points to chemical and biological fallout, to the hazardous gases of the oil fire smoke, the toxic dust of depleted uranium shells, unapproved injections and pills, and petrochemical poisoning.
I really don't think that the government bureaucracies of any country was actually prepared for what happened with Desert Storm. And what has happened with Desert Storm is that the technology of modern warfare has outstripped the capabilities to deal with the end results. What we need to do now is, instead of concentrating on all these new weapons and things, is figure out what the weapons that we're using are going to do to our troops.
Since 500,000 troops returned to the US, many are terrified they have brought a mystery illness back with them. Some are so sick they can't work anymore. Wives and children claim to be developing the same symptoms. Some veterans have committed suicide. While virtually unreported in Britain, the severity of Desert Storm syndrome with its increasing numbers have forced Congress to investigate their claims.
I have respiratory tract problems, and I don't bleed normally like I used to have clotting problems.
Diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, bleeding gums, loose teeth, mucus leaking from my eyes and my nose constantly.
I started getting the runs all the time. The muscle and joint pain were bad. I started losing my hair.
Well, I can't sleep at night. I can't breathe. I can't swallow.
I'm having problems with my bowel movements. I'm having problems with my kidneys. I'm having aches. I'm having numbness. I'm having pain that just it's a dull pain, don't go away.
Memory, I can't remember right. Memory, you know, I lose my memory sometimes.
I thought maybe it was just me. I was getting older and maybe I wasn't eating right or something like that. But then all of a sudden, I started getting phone calls, and other members of the American Legion were getting phone calls from soldiers that were having similar symptoms, the fatigue and the aching joints primarily. And then we started getting reports of people that were having rashes and hair loss and bleeding gums and a lot more physical problems than what I was experiencing. And they were getting the same response. It's all psychological.
Every morning I would get up and I would cough up a phlegm out of my lungs. It was literally so dark and so thick that you could cut it with a knife. And it's funny because when I went to the Veterans Administration, they gave me a complete physical, and I told them about the pain in my chest and the coughing up of sputum, the frequent urinations. The doctor said that I was totally healthy and that was natural in some persons.
What did you make of that?
Well, when he told me that, I knew they were crazy.
I was with Ghost Troop, second of the 2nd ACR, and I was an M1A1 tank crewman. I was the loader on the captain's tank. I loved it. Being in the cab is something special. They do their work serious, and they take it serious. It was in March that I got sick, and I couldn't do really too much of anything. Within a couple of weeks, I lost probably around 60 pounds, and at that time, I was crawling in and out of my tank. I couldn't walk too good, and I was so weak I just couldn't move except to to crawl in and do my job and come out and rest. They figured I had AIDS or something like that, and they put a little shelter out in the middle of the desert away from everybody and left me out there, and the IV had went empty and it backed up and blood was just coming out, and I was just there by myself, and they were scared to touch me.
I was in the psychiatric ward for 5.5 months. There they did a medical board and determined that I would be retired from the Army on 50% disability. I repeatedly asked them to look at the other things that were wrong with me, and they continued to claim that this was a psychological disorder. And that's all there was.
But Sylvia's physical condition has left her unable to work. She's dissatisfied with the system. Her medical state remains undiagnosed and untreated.
They want to blame it on something that they know about. They want to say, it's easy for them to say, well, if you have AIDS or HIV, it's easy for them to test for that and show it's positive, and then they can fall on that and say, well, that's why you're like that.
I finally went on to Indiana University Hospital in Indianapolis, and a doctor there found that my immune system was broke down. I had no immune system, and he requested that the military doctors then do a liver biopsy. They refused. I was verbally chastised for going outside of the military system. I was told that I could and may lose my military medical benefits if I continued to seek help outside of the military system, and they would not pay this doctor.
Nick Kresh only spent 6 days in the Gulf and is now so sick he can't work. No one has diagnosed his problem. The Army treats him with drugs.
January, March of '92, the muscle spasms started going on, the rectal bleeding. I started passing out all the time. The headaches started getting worse. The bleeding gums, it'd bleed without touching them, and it even hurt to eat. And then that's when they started hitting the drugs. Morphine at first, and then methadone, then Percocets, then Darvon or Demerol. You know, they give you so much medication you can't feel anything anyways.
Of the 231,000 US troops discharged after the war, 72,000 have received help through the veterans' hospitals. The government has been forced to start a Persian Gulf registry, but many have been barred from receiving treatment.
When he was deployed, Michael was perfectly healthy. Within a week after arriving in the Gulf, Michael started rectal bleeding. He also had chest pain, a rash. No diagnostic procedures were done on my son whatsoever. No blood tests, no x-rays, nothing.
Some soldiers were allowed to waive their exit physicals to get home faster, not realizing that this could be a life and death decision. Soldiers pronounced fit could not claim later on that they were suffering a war-related illness.
Michael never saw a doctor, tried to contact several VA hospitals in Washington, D.C., and Walter Reed Army Medical Center. He was told that he did not qualify for medical treatment. And by the time we found out that Michael had cancer, he was near the end of his life. It was too late.
Veterans with officially recognized service-related disabilities are entitled to free health care through hospitals run by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Those still in the forces are treated by military hospitals. The leading one is the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington.
We're doing all that I know to do. We're doing all that medical science knows to do. We've used all the consultants from civilian institutions that there are. We've asked Congress for help for further funding and resources. We've set systems into place to identify and follow these ill veterans or service personnel. I think the one area where we haven't done enough is in communicating all of this to those who are ill.
Terry Small's husband lost 45 pounds, had hair loss, memory loss and diarrhea, and was due for treatment at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center when the orders were changed and he was diagnosed with stress. Terry publicized his case. He was transferred to Hawaii.
Usually you go to a duty station and you're there for 3 years. We've moved 4 times since 1991. And they have said, you know, well, you know, you need to kind of control your wife. You know, you need to keep her quiet. You need to do something about this. If you can't control, you know, are you such an incompetent soldier that you cannot control your wife?
It appears to me that they have diseases 1 through 100 in a book somewhere, and they're taking symptoms A through C that I have, and if my symptoms don't fit their diseases, then I'm not sick.
Our folks are scared of what they've got. They're scared of the rashes. They're scared of the bleeding gums. They're scared of feeling sick. They're scared of what their financial situation is because they can't work. They're scared of losing their career in the military.
Victor Sylvester, a Vietnam veteran, set up an independent support network when his son went to the Gulf. With the developing mystery illness, he's received more than 8,000 calls from sick veterans.
I'm being told one thing and then being told another, being given numerous drugs and prescriptions that are not working. They are scared. They are confused. They don't know where to go for the right answers for the truth, because the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs, their credibility with the Desert Storm veteran in the United States stands at 0. And they don't know who to believe.
They told me that it would be in my best interest not to have kids until they finally find out what it is. The VA told me the same thing, that it would not be a good idea to have any kids at this time.
If Desert Storm syndrome can be passed on by the veterans, the implications are immense and extremely disturbing. Cluster studies are already beginning to show up incidences of miscarriages, sick spouses, and birth defects.
He has an artificial eye, he has an ear missing, his jaw down here is underdeveloped, it doesn't go all the way up. There's no reason to believe that, you know, anything runs in our families, you know, because the background, there's nothing. And the severity of the abnormalities just shocked us.
Despite international condemnation, the Iraqis have reportedly deployed poison gas on more than 200 occasions. These are mustard gas victims, and Iran says that 30,000 of its troops have been poisoned since Iraq first used war gas in 1983.
After Halabja, no one disputed Saddam Hussein's stockpile of chemical weapons and his willingness to use them. During the build-up to the war, the Coalition Command instituted an unprecedented program of protection against nerve and biological agents. Undisclosed numbers of British and more than 130,000 US troops had the anthrax vaccine. Some troops received botulinum toxin vaccine and nerve agent protection tablets, both unapproved for humans in the States before the war.
I received the typical anthrax botulism shots, the vaccines, and I received pyridostigmine, a drug which is an anti-nerve agent drug that we were given, and I had a severe reaction to that drug when it was administered. I started developing twitching of my eyes, and they'd start running, a runny nose and a drooling and deltoid muscles and aches and pains, and I reported these conditions to our doctor, and I was told to continue taking them, that we needed to combat any type of chemical, biological warfare we might come in contact with.
As a nurse, Carol Piku travelled with a military hospital on the front line. Now she's too sick to work at all.
Right now I have the bladder and bowel incontinence. I also have some memory loss. I also been diagnosed with damage to the left thalamus of my brain. I've also been diagnosed with central and peripheral difficulties and a right ear balance disorder.
The pyridostigmine bromide, if it's given in too large a concentration, will cross what's known as the blood-brain barrier, get into the brain, and cause neurological problems. Those effects are documented, seem to be much rarer, but of course would give you concern if you were prescribing pyridostigmine to a large group of people where you didn't have any control over how much was prescribed.
I was told I probably wouldn't be able to function as a nurse again because of the fact if I was told to give a 50 cc of medicine, maybe I gave 100 or 5 or gave the wrong drug. I have to watch what I do on a day-to-day basis because I forget sometimes where I'm going and things that I should have done or accomplished. Like I left the oven on for 2 days.
The side effects from taking pyridostigmine bromide tablets, or NAPs, are the same as from exposure to organophosphate poisoning: visual problems, muscle weakness and diarrhea, symptoms some troops experienced. Troops are also critical of the mass inoculation program they were subjected to. Some had as many as 27 injections in 3 weeks, and many soldiers say there was no follow-up monitoring. Many soldiers believe they have been permanently damaged by these chemicals. One British soldier, Robert Lake, was seriously sick when he returned from the Gulf War. He believes his problems began with the injections he was given. The Ministry of Defence is now investigating his illness.
My body just went from being a normal state just to overloading with all the chemicals from the fires and what the drugs they pushed into us with the naps and the injections and that, and my body just couldn't take it anymore.
Robert's immune system has broken down. He now has to have a special diet and is allergic to most foods. He suffered pains in his chest, muscle failure, diarrhea, digestive problems, nausea, headaches, and is sensitive to light.
Well, a doctor and 2 medics arrived sort of to administer this drug to the whole of our workshops. And we were told, right, this is anthrax. But we've already had anthrax. No, this is the second anthrax. I said, why? What's the difference? Oh, this is just an add-on to it. I said, why? I said, this is a military version and it's better for you.
Later that day, he was violently sick, collapsed, and had to be taken away in an ambulance.
I just apparently just sort of fell forward on my head against the windscreen. So he stopped, went round the other side, opened it up and pulled me out. And I'd stopped breathing, so he started doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on me. And they were calling other people to give him a hand, and they got me breathing, so they got me in the back. My heartbeat was getting really weaker and weaker, and I stopped breathing again, so they gave me the kiss of life. And in the morning, the medic came around and said, I think you're getting sent out. We're going to get rid of you back to the UK, because there's something wrong, something's gone wrong here.
But Robert was returned to his unit on the front line. He continued to have health problems.
They asked me what I had today, what I've been eating. I said, yes, what have you done today? I said, I had the anthrax injection. I kept telling them I had the anthrax injection with that stuff all mixed in, whatever. He said, oh, no, you just had a panic attack. It's the only reason why you stopped breathing.
The Ministry of Defence have refused to give his doctor details of what was in the injections he received. Secrecy surrounds the injections and pills in the States too. Soldiers there have been unable to find out exactly what they were given. Sensitive drug information is coded and often impossible to uncover on leaving the military.
The aircraft carrier was 7,500 people, and the whole battle group of like 50 ships were inoculized one time. You stand in line and you get 6 shots. You weren't told what they were. You weren't told how many we were getting. You weren't told anything.
We got numerous pills. We got pills for Black Flag. We got anthrax shots. We got so many that I can't even name. Don't even know the name of. We got shots before we left Dallas Navy Air Station. We got shots when we got to California. We got even more shots when we reached Southwest Asia.
2 drugs were unapproved in the States before the war: the NAPS tablets and the botulinum toxin vaccine, withdrawn in the mid-1970s as there was insufficient data on its safety. The military applied for an official waiver to administer investigational drugs and vaccines on the soldiers without their informed consent. Never before had soldiers' rights been waived in this way.
They turned to the FDA and ordered the FDA to approve it on the spot. But that's just a charade. That doesn't change the nature of the drugs. They had not been adequately tested, and number 2, none of the soldiers were given adequate information, and there was no informed consent.
When I looked at the bottle, I noticed that it didn't have a name. Up to now, 16 years of service, all drugs had their manufacturer's name and a lot number. These drugs had a lot number and a random identification number. So therefore, I had to take the word of the nurse there that this medication was what she said it was.
Do you get special informed consent from the soldiers when you're giving these type of drugs?
Actually, the waiver was given so that we did not have to get informed consent for that, but we did it anyway. And soldiers were asked who took the botulinum vaccine to sign an informed consent paper.
And they said, Hammock, you're going to get your shots. And I said, no, I don't know what they are, so I'm not taking them. They grabbed me by my shoulders, held me up against the wall. The nurse peeled down my jacket, rolled up the sleeves of my T-shirt, and proceeded to give me the shots while I struggled. So even though I had told them that I might have some allergies, they went ahead and gave me the shots.
Venus Hammack never gave her informed consent for these vaccines. Now she's sick and unable to work full-time. Relying on part-time work, she waits to see if the mystery illness will qualify her for an army pension.
I haven't been able to concentrate. Well, actually, I was out because I can only work like 3 days in a row, and then I have a bad bout of diarrhea, and I'm out of work for a day.
Dr. Yolanda Hewitt Vaughan was a conscientious objector in the Gulf War. She refused to give experimental drugs and vaccines without informed consent.
The FDA had been requested by the Department of Defense to waiver my responsibility as a physician to provide informed consent to those that I would do an invasive procedure to, like, you know, injecting a biological. And I feel that that is not the area of responsibility or even the right of the FDA to do that.
Sentenced to 30 months in jail, she was made a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty for upholding the right of the individual to informed consent.
Back in World War II, we tried scientists and physicians for that very lack of informed consent when they experimented or treated patients under their care or control. And here we were now asking for a waiver of that very principle that the United States was responsible for putting into international law under the Nuremberg Code.
This was black letter international law going back to Nuremberg that was incorporated into U.S. military law in the 50s. And the American government perpetrated the Nuremberg crime on their own troops. And so they're afraid because they know what they did was not just irresponsible, not just negligent, it was criminal.
In the Nuremberg Code, they talk specifically about not experimenting.
Oh, absolutely. And obviously we adhere to that. Experimenting is exactly what it says, setting up a hypothesis and then testing it. We felt very, very comfortable that this was not, and could not possibly be construed as experimentation, since it was with a tested and safe agent.
Today is the 29th of January. The war's been going on now for 12 days. We've had a couple chemical alarm scares where we've had to put on our mask and our full chemical suit, and they all happen to be false alarms. There's little trace chemical in the air, but we think it's because the plants have been blown up in Iraq and the air is filtering this way. They say it's not enough to hurt you, though.
We have, in attacking those targets, have attacked them in such a way, and I can't give you all the technical aspects of it, to minimize the potential for any of those toxins to go into the air. It's not to say that it couldn't happen.
They tell us this stuff dissipates quickly in the air. I don't disagree with that, but when you're within 25 miles of something, it doesn't dissipate that quick, I don't believe, especially when you blow up megatons of it.
We've discovered something in the order of 140 and 150,000 munitions, something in the order of 600-700 tons of agent in bulk storage, and some 4,000 plus tons of precursors for making chemical warfare agents. Some of them we never did a full inventory of because they were so dangerous that it was not worth putting our personnel at risk to go into them and do a full inventory of what might have been in there and hence what was destroyed by that action. But basically the facilities were very heavily damaged. Virtually every bunker was hit.
There was animal carcasses, not just one or two, 25 to 200 or 300 carcasses in the desert that were at rest when they died. No signs of struggle whatsoever.
Just 6 days into the coalition bombing of Iraq's chemical munitions sites, a Czech anti-chemical unit found traces of a nerve agent, sarin, on the Saudi-Iraq border.
The Czech officials told me that what they detected was the residue from a
plant, chemical plant, or warehouse that was bombed by the Allied bombing early in the campaign.
Today, the French military confirmed they've detected the first traces of fallout from destroyed chemical installations.
Our country and the Allies were very concerned about this. They did a lot of research before they did their bombing. But that's something that you just have to live with and try to minimize. Of course, when you're talking about whether or not to go in an area, you have to consider it, but no government likes to broadcast this as a possibility. Chemical and biological weapons create such a reaction of fear and dread among the public that it's not something that you talk about a lot.
The Patriot missiles rise into the sky above Riyadh once again.
On the 20th of January 1991, the media reported extensive Scud attacks by the Iraqis in key coalition military sites. The missiles were reportedly destroyed in flight by Patriot rockets.
On January the 20th, we were all asleep. It was early in the morning, and there was a huge explosion took place over the camp. And it woke everybody up. And immediately the alarm went off, and they announced over the PA system to go to Mach 4, which is full chemical gear.
It was the testimony of the Seabees, the 24th Naval Reserve Construction Battalion out of Alabama, who stunned a Senate hearing in Washington in June this year by claiming they were targets of a chemical weapon released in the Gulf. 79 people in the unit now suffer the mystery illness.
There was a strong odor of ammonia in the air. Part of it was in my mask. My eyes was burning, my nose was running, and I slipped a poncho on and went on to the bunker. And when I got to the bunker, my skin was on fire.
I had burning skin, my eyes was watery, I couldn't breathe.
Well, the nerve gases are extremely toxic, and basically they paralyze the muscles. They act by blocking messages going down the nerves and blocking the message from the nerves to the muscles. So all of your muscles become paralyzed. That means that your eyes can't focus, your pupils become very small, you start to salivate, dribble profusely from the mouth, you may have diarrhea, and you will have difficulty in breathing. Now, all of these effects depend on how much you're exposed to.
There were several people complaining about their skin burning and eyes running and nose running, and same symptoms I was having. But at the time, we didn't really know what was taking place. It was total chaos.
I felt like it was some kind of chemicals in the air. In fact, you could see a little mist, falling down or something. But, after it was over, the next day they told us not to say anything. We couldn't talk. We talked between ourselves, but not to anybody else.
The next morning, they passed that explosion off as a sonic boom. But there is men that saw the fireball. And you don't get a fireball with a sonic boom that I know of.
I think that was a chemical attack, but I can't prove it. And, this government here is trying to hide everything, so we'll never know.
I say it was mustard gas because of these things that pops out all over us. Mustard gas would cause this, but the government don't want to say it. They don't want to say we was hit with nothing. But then I would like to know where this came from.
Investigating the Seabees' eyewitness accounts, the Regal report to Senate on the 9th of September raised serious concerns about a possible link between Desert Storm syndrome and low-level exposure to chemical, biological and other hazardous agents in the Gulf. The report suggests Iraq may have used a mixed cocktail of chemical and biological toxins in its Scud and Frog missiles, a cocktail designed to defeat all precautions taken against known chemical or biological agents.
I wasn't good when I went over there. It's when I came back when I started having problems.
What sort of problems?
First it started with headaches, which I still have. And I started passing out, started forgetting where I was supposed to be at. Started wanting to beat up everybody in the house, anxiety problems, disorientation, joint problems, bumps all over my body started coming out. And I was just a messed up person.
The report states that little is known of the long-term effect of non-lethal exposure to nerve agents, but statistics collated from the dates of Scud attacks show that the nearer the unit to an attack, the higher the incidence of illness.
We have reviewed all of that data and still have absolutely no evidence that any chemical agents or biologic agents, warfare agents, were used in the Gulf by the Iraqis or by anyone else for that matter.
Can't walk right, can't talk right. Yeah, memory, I can't remember right. Memory, you know, I lose my memory sometimes. Aching joints. It's hard to sleep with aching joints. But there's nobody can do anything about it, so I don't complain. If you complain to the wrong person, I don't think they'd do anything about it anyway.
While the US government continues to deny any chemical or biological exposure in Gulf soldiers, no one is testing them. But one doctor saw media coverage of the symptoms and believed he recognized them as those of a bacteria.
I think they have an infection, that the infection is manifest in their urine, and that makes a very easy way of testing for it. And I got urine specimens, and without exception, they were strongly positive. I think I've established that in 7 out of 7 and 2 wives, it's 9 out of 9, that the problem can be approached successfully. To my knowledge, this is the only 9 in remission in the country.
Craig Rubenstein is one of the 9 who have been able to afford private treatment with Dr. Hyman.
At least with cancer, I'd know what I had. I'd know what my chances were. Somebody could tell me something. I'd have some options, some treatments. Something could be done. Whereas, you know, the way it was, I was in limbo. You know, I was stuck in nowhere.
At 22 years old, Craig was flying helicopters in the Gulf. 6 months after returning to the States, he got sick, with muscle spasms, hair loss, fatigue, aching joints and headaches. He was grounded for months at a time.
Like, I did 2 more weeks at Walter Reed. In that time, they really put me through the ringer, doing every test. I mean, they took bone marrow, everything. It wasn't fun, and it was all for nothing. They didn't find anything. And the whole time I was telling them about Dr. Hyman, and they're just blowing him off. Oh, he couldn't possibly have figured this out if, you know, us geniuses here at Walter Reed couldn't figure it out.
Thousands of sick veterans can't afford the treatment. Craig's parents mortgaged their house to help their son.
I fly the H-64 Apache attack helicopter. It's the most advanced attack helicopter in the world. It's a $14 million aircraft. And to train an Apache pilot costs around $1 million. And the treatment costs in the neighborhood of $25,000. And to me, that's peanuts compared to you know, what's $25,000 to $1 million pilot? It's nothing.
Since Dr. Hyman has been treating the Deseert Storm syndrome, he has been in conflict with the Department of Veteran Affairs, who don't agree with his methodology. As well as facing Iraqi weaponry, soldiers were not given the means of protecting themselves against the pollutants of modern warfare. Some soldiers were found to have contracted Leishmaniasis, an endemic disease picked up from sandfly bites. Major Richard Haynes saw fellow reservists falling ill. He began documenting the symptoms and presented his evidence to Congress. He believes the sickness is an environmental one.
I developed a database of these soldiers and their exposures in the Gulf, learned about the various exposures, and documented over 50 types of exposures. There were soldiers down inside 5,000-gallon tankers swabbing down the insides without any protective wear. Their boots soaked in this stuff for days. and in their clothing, and in their hair. There's fuel in their shower water. They could not get away from these toxics.
Our shower water, and I hauled the water, it had diesel fuel mixed in with it because the system wasn't purged. Your pumps and your filter and your hose all has fuel in them if you put water in that tank.
Even after he returned home from the Gulf, when he would take a shower, his body would bubble, and you could actually smell the oil penetrating through my son's skin.
A lot of dead animals. We had dogs, cats, rats, you know, everything, every animal was dead in the whole area, so they had to spray to get rid of the carcasses.
There was a problem with mosquitoes and flies so bad. Our battalion had contacted somebody local to come in and spray. We have no idea what it was. The fellow spraying it couldn't tell us because he didn't speak English. And they would come in sometimes when we was getting ready to go to sleep, sometimes while we was eating a meal, and just drive through the area and fog the area up with just smoke.
Ron's job in the petroleum unit exposed him to all kinds of chemicals and pollutants. When he returned, he had high levels of aluminium, nickel and lead in his blood and was diagnosed with petrochemical poisoning. The Veterans Hospital couldn't help him, so he resorted to private care and environmental medicine, a new medical practice which looks at how chemicals affect the body.
Now, modern medicine's hung up on tests, and one of the reasons this syndrome is controversial is we don't have a black and white test. Now, you see these people, they all have the same symptoms, they all respond to the same things. You can't deny that it isn't there.
What Dr. Boyles and other environmental doctors believed they recognized in these desert stormers was multiple chemical sensitivity, or MCS.
What we're talking about here are a group of people who have either worked in chemicals for a long time or have been exposed to massive doses of chemicals, and then they develop a sensitivity so that even after they're removed from this bad environment, they will react to minute amounts of the chemicals that wouldn't affect the majority of the population.
At that time, I just felt like I wanted to give up. I was still sleeping 20 hours a day. I couldn't get around very well at all. If I went anywhere, I had to have transportation. If I did go on my own, sometimes I would go and not recall why I was going. And several times I found myself just sitting in my truck, not knowing if I was going or coming. And my insides felt so bad at times, it felt like I was drying up and dying.
Ron Brandis has been treated by Dr. Boyles for a year now. He has to have regular intravenous boosters to build up his immune system.
How are you doing?
His improvement's been remarkable. If you talk to Ron now and look at Ron, he looks like a normal person. The change in his life from here on in, however, will be that he will always have to be careful where he goes. Because now he won't be able to be a heavy construction equipment operator because the exhaust fumes and the oil and the gas would make him ill.
The US government is researching into MCS and its links with the syndrome. Meanwhile, those who can't pay for treatment are cynical that their health will fail long before any definite answers emerge.
We do recognize it. The difficulty we have and the disability boards have is how does one diagnose it? We can do it on the basis of certainly these non-specific symptoms, but it's not been put together with a case definition similar to chronic fatigue syndrome, for example.
I'm supposed to be getting what they call incapitation pay for being off sick, which right now they say, well, you can only be on it a year, and we don't know if we're going to pay you or not, but yet I haven't been released from the military. And it's been a big burden on our family, both mentally and financially.
We win or lose.
Gary Zuspan's sickness has cost him everything he owns. To survive, he's forced to live full-time in this environmentally clean room. He suffers from petrochemical poisoning, which has caused brain damage, pulmonary spasms and muscle and stomach damage. Neither the military nor the VA will even pay for his drips.
When he first got home, when he came off the plane, he was very sick. He looked pale. He was real thin. His eyes had a blue hue to them, the whites of his eyes. When he kissed me, this metal, I mean, it was almost like I couldn't kiss him. There was such a horrible metal taste.
They did some blood work on me, and it showed a bunch of stuff in there like trimethylbenzenes and stuff that I shouldn't even have had in my body to begin with. And they were all oil-based products.
Well, I think anybody with an IQ of 3 watching CNN and seeing all that oil smoke would have to realize that someone would be ill. I mean, that's just common sense.
As many as 800 oil wells were set on fire during the war. The US government was quick to blame Saddam Hussein for the environmental pollution caused, but scientists have since shown that much of the oil fire damage had been started weeks before by the coalition bombing.
We know that there are satellites that take pictures all the time, and there were people who wanted to get access to satellite pictures of the fires. I know from my colleagues that it was impossible to get those pictures. Normally, with no war going on, you could get those pictures.
Access to information on the oil fires was denied to the scientific community, and the US government issued a memo preventing their scientists from speaking out about their work during the war.
I think it would be politically embarrassing to the United States government to have the accusation laid at their doorstep that some of the soot that was coming from the Middle East was due to fires set by Allied bombing.
During the war, the US government bombed Iraqi oil reserves and tankers. A secret report commissioned by the government before the war predicted the effects of a 20 million barrel oil spill off Kuwait. It highlighted the health hazards to troops downwind without respirators. In February 1991, the Naval Medical Research Institute confirmed the hazards of crude oil exposure. In particular, the risks of 2 toxic gases, hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide.
When the decision was made to go to war, the Pentagon knew full well that there would be an environmental catastrophe for everyone in the Gulf region, and also, of course, that they would be putting their own military personnel in there to deal with the known carcinogens that would be produced by these massive oil well fires and things of that nature.
I can even concede the fact that they didn't have time to get things there that would protect them. I'll give them that. There was no way. The war was over before anybody blinked an eye. I can give them that. But what I can't give them is the fact that they knew what would happen, the symptoms and the injuries these people would have coming back, and then not treat them for them or even test them or watch.
We did our job, and we did what was expected of us, and we did it with honor and dignity. And I guess all we really want is our dignity back. But to lose everything you own for serving your country, and them to turn their back on you the way they've done is just, I don't know, deplorable.
I could live with the fact if Gary died serving his country, defending freedom. What I can't live with is the fact that nobody cares enough to give health care to someone who went and defended freedom. That's what I couldn't live with if he died for that reason. And that's unacceptable in this country.
As more and more people speak out with the symptoms of Desert Storm syndrome, government is being forced to acknowledge the hazards the troops faced. One of the first risks that emerged in 1991 was depleted uranium. A report to Congress revealed that the troops hadn't known the dangers of handling it. In Britain, The Independent exposed a secret report by the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority, which highlighted the hazards of DU.
Because depleted uranium had a military benefit,
and was available in great abundance and relatively cheaply, virtually free for that matter, it was seen as being just a great military boon. And in the course of that, the longer-term environmental and health effects were never really thought of. And so what we saw was the large-scale use of depleted uranium, some 300 tons by weight was expended. And that means 940,000 A-10 bullets and approximately 4,000 or so tank rounds were fired in the 43 days of the war. Had there not been instances of friendly fire, that is, where depleted uranium weapons penetrated U.S. vehicles, perhaps it would not have come to the fore at all.
Depleted uranium is a waste product from the nuclear industry and has a low level of radioactivity. When the DU shells explode, they give off a toxic dust, which when inhaled can cause damage to lungs and kidneys.
I was not informed of us using depleted uranium or the Allied forces, and I thought, well, we went through a heavy artillery area, and these armored tanks and that were blown up by our Allied forces, and we sat in that area for over an hour.
After blowing up tanks with DU shells, many US and British troops went souvenir hunting, putting themselves unknowingly at risk from the dust.
Saw them for a distance, thought, well, looks an interesting one to go and have a look. We'd go inside them, round them, just clamber in and see what we could find. Any Iraqi personal effects, whatever, and then back to base.
Ian is one of a handful of British troops who have agreed to speak out about his illness. He has many of the symptoms of Deseert Storm syndrome.
I've lost weight, which is about 1.5 stone since then. I'm fatigued all the time. I just don't want to do anything. My memory on the short-term basis just goes, and it was known months ago that this depleting uranium could cause effects, yet we'd had no warnings. And now I just want to know that I'm going to be okay.
Although the issue has received media attention in Britain, the Ministry of Defence is unconvinced there is any problem.
I've issued invitations to anyone to come forward, but so few people have actually done so. Now, you could investigate as to why. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's because they don't have symptoms that can be put together as this form of Deseert Storm syndrome. It's almost as if people are looking for a syndrome.
The men very often don't come forward because they're worried about their promotions, their postings, their pensions. And it's frustrating for us because obviously it seems as if there isn't a problem because we're the only ones that hear about it. They come to us, they feel that we're the end of the road, we're a civilian organisation. They feel they can trust us because it's confidential. And of course to the military and to the MOD, it would seem that there's not a problem, but there is a problem.
And we've been in contact with a number of sources who've informed us that they have in turn been contacted by people complaining of these symptoms.
Historically, victims of military negligence have managed to bring cases against the Ministry of Defence and the government, win and get compensation.
Once we've collated all the information, if we can prove that there is some common ground, we would like to issue claims against the Ministry of Defence for compensation. Obviously, the more people that come forward, the more likelihood it is of proving the claim.
In 1992, the Ministry of Defence and the Pentagon were brought to court by Mark Stevens, a lawyer who represented the British families of the 9 Gulf soldiers killed in the friendly fire incident. He successfully obtained a verdict of unlawful killing.
The Ministry of Defence and the Army have a sort of a cadre of obsessive secrecy, and they will not let any information out unless you absolutely draw it like drawing teeth. And that's really the only way one can liken dealing with the Ministry of Defence. They're insensitive and they just don't want to know.
In Britain and the United States, they're supposed to be democracies, that's the theory. So it's for the people to hold their leaders accountable. And if the people are not prepared to hold their leaders accountable, then it raises the question to what extent Britain and America are not really democracies, but are plutocracies run by corporate elites who decided to go off and steal 50% of the world's oil supply and use their own lower middle classes, comprising the armed forces, basically as a mercenary class, and knowingly exposing them to grave harm and damage.
I spent 24 years in the military, and basically I felt it was my obligation to go, that I owed the people here something back, and upon my return and needing our government's help, I feel like I've been totally abandoned, that we don't need you any longer and you're on your own.